Today I'm excited to welcome Chaz Harris and Adam Reynolds to the podcast. They are the co-creators of the Promised Land book, which is a wonderful piece of inclusive children's literature that Will and I fell in love with earlier this year. The podcast listeners have heard all about this book over the last few months. Welcome, Chaz and Adam.
Hi. Hello.
So let's get started with a little more about yourselves. Tell us about your backgrounds. Chaz, we'll start off with you.
I originally from the UK and moved to New Zealand about 10 years ago, and I originally come back from a background in film, so I worked for film producers and in development in the UK for a producer called Alison Owen, who did Elizabeth and Saving Mr. Banks, and then moved to New Zealand, and I've been doing kind of short films and web series, and then from there have sort of weirdly segued into children's books. The way life throws you a curveball.
And Adam?
Yeah, I was born in Wellington, New Zealand, so lived here my whole life. And I also come from a film background, and I work as an assistant editor on a children's television series during the day. And then in my evenings, work on Promised Land, Maiden Voyage, and also a lesbian web series called Potluck, which was also made here in Wellington, and I'm an editor on that.
Fantastic. So how did you two meet up and come together to work on Promised Land?
Well, I first met Chaz at my graduation for my film school. Someone else in my crew knew Chaz and invited him to come and see our graduation film. And from there, we chatted to each other, and I had a script that I was working on that I wanted Chaz to have a look at, and so we had a meeting and we chatted about that, and then segued into Promised Land.
Yeah, I remember it was sort of it's the end of a conversation about the first script, and then Adam had sort of mentioned, there's this other project I'm kind of thinking about, working on, and then I kind of pounced on that, and I was like, tell me more. And then, I think I went home that night and I just suddenly had like all these ideas, and I think I sent about like a 5-page email of stuff. I was like, I think we should work on this and see if we could come up with like a story. I remember it being about we talked about the kind of representation, but we were like, let's try and come up with a story that stands on its own, that isn't about sexuality, or isn't defined by sexuality. And that was really where the sort of the whole premise or driving force for the way to make these types of books came from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that approach too. The sexuality is like the least interesting thing that's going on there, and it's just a story about two people who come together.
Yeah.
So it was Valentine's 2017 when Promised Land first came out, which was such an appropriate day after all. What was the inspiration behind Farm Boy Jack and Prince Leo? How did all that kind of come together?
So I guess I first started thinking about it on the bus one day, and I just had this idea that I wanted, like, why don't we have an animated film with two gay leads and make it a love story, and then the idea came in of a farm boy and a prince, but then when I started speaking to Chaz, then it became the full story that Promised Land ended up becoming. But it was, just came from that idea of how come we don't have something like that, something which would have been so useful for kids like us if we would, when we were growing up, to have that kind of representation and to have that, something like that in our lives.
Sure.
Were there any books out there in what's currently available that kind of inspired your way, or did you just kind of charge off with your own vision?
We kind of we looked at all of the other sort of fairy tale stories, and that was almost how we came up with the story, by looking at all of the common structural elements of those stories and comparing them and going, we need to have this happen because this happens in all 10 of these. There's a spell, or there's this, or it's sort of using. It was sort of like using fairy tale tropes and all of those things, and saying, how can we make that different? How can we flip that on its head? How can we sort of change changed the conversation, even though that we know that has something like that happens. But for instance, you have, there's usually like the damsel in distress. It's like, how can we change that narrative around? And picking all of those kinds of tropes and then laying those down into the story and going, okay, well that still works, and it's better than it would be if it was your kind of stock standard fairy tale in the kind of traditional sense.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you both talked about your backgrounds a few minutes ago, writer didn't really seem to factor in for either one of you. What was it like taking on the writing role in this and writing for a children's book rather than something of television and that medium that you'd been more involved in?
Yeah, I mean, definitely we had the writing experience in scripts. And so the benefit I think that brings you is that you understand structure and dramatic structure when you're actually coming up with a story. For sure. And the bit that we hadn't really tackled much was writing in prose. And we had a really awesome editor called Rebecca Gumbley who helped us out a lot with that. But it really took us like a couple of goes at it from, so we had a very detailed, long story outline that we had at first. So it was a case of condensing it down, knowing what we could take out and it still making sense. And, then just reading it aloud a lot. You sit in a room for hours and get sick of hearing your own words in a way, but you're just reading it aloud to go, does this sound nice to read? Does this still make sense? And I remember we did a version where we decided we were going to do the whole book as rhyming, and it just got like unwieldy. But we had a version of the book that was very kind of, I'd say like very pedestrian, kind of like this happens, then this happens, then this happens. And then we turned it all into a kind of a rhyming version, and that kind of didn't really work. But we found a lot of imagery from imagery. Like the visual imagery was created by doing that. So, I mean, in terms of the text, there's things like, like Elena along the surface of the frozen river type stuff. A lot of that description or language or the imagery of that came from doing that exercise, and then we wrote it back in prose and found we actually figured out how to write it properly at that point. It took a few tries of getting it right.
And we sent it to quite a few different people that we trusted for feedback and stuff, because we knew we wanted that outside perspective just to help us make sure that what we had was right and was going to read well with parents, and that kids were also going to enjoy it. Because Chaz, you sent it to your friend who has children, and she read it to her children. Yeah,
she's got kind of ADHD type kids. They just won't stand still. They just won't sit still, and they sat there. There were no pictures, but they sat there and listened to the whole story. And she said they didn't move the whole time they listened, and they didn't have any questions at the end.
That's a very good sign.
Yeah. And then right at the end of when they actually got the book, I remember Skyping them, and her older son leaned into the camera and was like, "Why are there two boys kissing at the end?" And I remember I didn't really know what to say at that time, and I just remember kind of replying, "Because you're asking me that," and he kind of was like, "Oh, okay."
That's a great answer. As an adult, I can say that's a great answer, and exactly why the book needs to exist.
Yeah.
In the journey of creation, was there a thought to go and try to find a traditional publisher for children's books, or was it always something you wanted to bring into the world on your own?
I think it was something that we knew we wanted to create it on our own terms, because we knew we wanted to push so many elements of the book that traditional publishers are currently too scared to push. and we knew that the representation had to be there, and that we knew we wanted a kiss at the end, and we knew all of these things that we knew that had to be in the book, and that we were worried that a traditional publisher would try and change or take out. We have, since release of the book, looked into traditional publishing as a way to try and get it out there further now that it's created, but it's still very difficult to find publisher willing to pick it up. And
which has been a strange experience. I had a couple of meetings, and it was just it seemed to be the reason that they didn't want it was because there's a certain style of artwork that traditional picture books that they publish. They'll have the top 10 illustrators for the UK, for example. They're the top 10 illustrators of picture books, and if it's not by them, it's not going to sell as far as they're concerned. And so I had a weird meeting with a publisher in London. There, that picture book editor in particular was a person of colour and gay, but they said to me, we wouldn't publish this book here unless we just changed all the illustrations. So I was like Meryl Streep in The Devil Wears Prada, just like, no.
I'm flummoxed by that answer because this artwork is gorgeous.
Yeah, it's amazing. But I think that's the difference between if you're a writer of illustrated books, the traditional way of doing it is you're just a writer, you give your text away, the text is bought by a publisher, then they go off, they find the illustrator and commission the artwork, and then you get your book at the end of it. Because we're both, technically, we come from visual art backgrounds, we knew what the book looked like in our heads. Both of us have a very clear vision, and almost every page we completely, that was exactly what was in our head.
Every single page we went into a lot of detail on the composition of where characters would be, where the text would be going. We were completely hands-on with every page of the entire book, and that will help. Well, because we're from that kind of visual film background, we knew a lot about that.
So we were able to give very much a detailed brief to say, this is what we want it to look like, but if you've got better ideas. And then there were things that changed because, Christine or Bo, they kind of said, oh, what about this? And it's like, oh, that's better. So, from that perspective, it's a case of we got to collaborate on the visual side of the book in a way that we wouldn't ever be able to do with a traditional publisher, and also had control over a lot of the way it was marketed and promoted when it came out.
Mm-hmm. Of course, and that's crucial because you never know necessarily with the big publisher how that's going to all kind of shake out.
And it's like once it actually exists. So now, we've gone out there and we've managed to get support from quite major people. It's like we kind of have everything that they would need. Like they can put the quotes by Ian McKellen or George Takei. Put that on the back of their edition. Like we've got it for them. It's like the hesitancy is weird. I understand it. I sort of understand it a little bit more and a little bit less in America, just because of 44% of all of our orders have come from America and Canada, which still surprises me because we are a long way away. But so I would have thought, you kind of go, I would have thought that there would be publishers there that would really want to take it on, maybe more so than somewhere like the UK. But at the same time, it's obviously a much more charged issue there.
Right. And we should mention, as you just said, that there is with 44% of the orders coming from North America, that there is the sticker shock occasionally for people who pick up the book because the shipping is as much as the book itself.
Yeah.
Which we can certainly say to everybody, it's worth it. Buy the book.
Yes. It's the thing about that as well. That's sort of why for the Kickstarter we're running at the moment for Maiden Voyage, we've only promised a paperback edition. We only promised a paperback edition of Promised Land on our first Kickstarter, and then we actually upgraded to hardbacks because we were like, this is the first book, and it's amazing that we even got to make it or that it's a thing. We upgraded to that, and I think what we might do after this Kickstarter's over, depending on how much we raise, we'll maybe offer the option to upgrade to a hardback through our store or something later, just because it's the additional shipping. It was a lot more than the book to actually ship a hardback. Whereas
I'm sure. Yeah.
shipping a paperback is the same cost as the book, so it's a little bit more manageable. So
It's still not ideal,
no,
but
Yeah, and at least the ebook is also equally gorgeous for people who want that.
and we've got that on Amazon and iBooks and on our website as well.
Yeah.
So we've got that everywhere we could get it. We've tried to make sure that's available too.
And it's really, I mean, it is really good in that sense with the way that the world and technology has sort of enabled these kinds of stories to get out there. In 20 years ago, even if we'd done something like this, you would have to go to a traditional publisher because you'd have no way of getting it out there. You know, we don't technically need to be in bookshops. You know, we have bookshops that are very kindly taking it on, but they, you know, one or two bookshops asking for a copy of the book, you know, it's like it's not worth it. You know, the cost of actually getting it to them is more than, you know, you can actually get direct to the audience with online stores and all of the technology that's available and ebooks. So it's great that at least it's really raising the awareness and people knowing about it, because I think there's still, even the LGBT community, like internationally, I think still doesn't really know about a book.
Unfortunately, that's probably true. That's one of the reasons we very much wanted to have you guys on, especially as you're getting going with this new Kickstarter for Maiden Voyage. So let's kind of move over and talk a little bit about that. It was back on October 11th, which was National Coming Out Day, that the Kickstarter for Maiden Voyage was unveiled. What's coming up in the new book?
Oh, well, it's a high sea adventure with lesbian protagonists, and it's got pirates and an evil queen, and the story's in really good shape where we have it currently, and we're just doing final touches on it. But we're really, really excited to be able to bring it to life and to show people this brand new section. Basically, the idea for the new book is that it's set in the same world as Promised Land, but it's got completely different characters. And if you with the first book, we had a map at the start of the book, and there's a little port in the bottom right hand side. There it is, a little port Ciccone on the bottom right hand side, and that's where our new tale begins. And then we travel south from there to explore new waters.
And one of the things I like about the book so much too, besides being inclusive sexuality wise, is it includes many persons of color. Across all the characters, which is just another mark of that inclusiveness. Yeah,
for sure. That was really important to us, to make sure that we were inclusive on all the fronts that we could be, and to try and, you know, make this a book that is as good as it can be and can resonate with as many people as possible.
How important is Kickstarter to the process overall? Your first one was certainly very successful. As we're recording this, we're actually recording this just a couple days after the Kickstarter began, and you're already to a third of your goal, which is great. And there'll be a week left of the Kickstarter when this airs. But how important is it to the whole getting the book ready to go and out to the world?
Well, it wouldn't exist without that. So it's pretty vital. You know, they are expensive books to put together, because you're paying for illustration of 32 images, and then actually have to pay for the printing. And you know, we found also that there are print on demand. We couldn't do print on demand because of the dimensions and shape and type of book that we chose to make, which was kind of error on our part.
We kind of decided that we wanted it to kind of be kind of wider, like a nice almost widescreen type images. So you get like nice big images, and we wanted it to be a big size. And,
sort of like a lap book that you can sit across your laps and read. But I mean, Kickstarter is probably the again, going back to what I was saying about the technology and things that you can do now, you can go straight to your audience and go and find them and say, hey, do you want this? Or help make it happen, which is sort of the power dynamics have shifted a little bit in that sense. It's just then it's like you need the Kickstarter, but then it's also vital that you get the media coverage from people that are willing to talk about it and write about it. So the two of those go hand in hand, because if people don't know that it's there as well, I mean, we're lucky that this time we did have an audience. We did have all the people who backed us on Kickstarter the previous time to go out to and say, we've done this and now we've proven what we can do, which we certainly didn't have the first time. So I think that's really helped.
Mm.
What were your expectations going into the first one? Did you feel pretty good about getting funded?
It was quite nerve-wracking, I think, because we really liked what we had. We really liked the story. We were really proud of what we had come up with, and the concept of the whole book, and we definitely thought it was something that was needed, but we just weren't sure whether other people would agree. And that was what was exciting about by the end of the first Kickstarter, was we had that proof that this is something that people want, this is something that people need, and that was awesome. There was definitely a period during the first maybe 3 weeks of that original Kickstarter where it wasn't looking like we were going to make our target, and we were struggling to get the Kickstarter to people's eyes, I guess.
Yeah.
But then in that last week, everything picked up and we just smashed our goal.
Yeah.
And
so we got some New Zealand news coverage, and that sort of it was what sort of I think triggered the rest. And then kind of just went a bit viral after that. But yeah, they say that you're meant, in order to be successful on Kickstarter in your first few days, you need to raise between 25 to 30%. And so we hadn't raised that at all on the first Kickstarter, I think. Or had we? No. Yeah, it must have been about that, but it wasn't in the first few days. That was in the first 3 weeks.
Mm.
So because of that, we were this kind of is it going to happen? So that was really great. And yeah, I mean, we kind of can't predict the future, but we hope that will, pick up in terms of the media will want to talk about it, this time. And I think, I mean, it was interesting. We chose to do a book with lesbian protagonists because we had a lot of people who had got this first book who were emailing us going, can you do a princesses one, or can you do, one with two leads, or can you do a trans book, or anything like that? So we'd like to do that, but we want to make sure that when we're doing them correctly and authentically, rather than, I saw a comment on our Kickstarter this morning of saying, I hope your books include trans characters, and our map includes references to, many kind of trans women of color in particular, but we wanted to make sure that when we provide characters of an identity, that they're lead protagonists, that they're not sidelined, or that they're not supporting characters. That everyone should be the hero of their own story. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of
that's the idea of the
goal.
whole series going forward, is that each book would have a different identity protagonist.
And hopefully we also want to work with authors that are of that identity, so that we're not speaking for anyone.
Mm-hmm. What's the grand plan for these books? How far do you think it can go, and how far have you looked out in the future already?
It can go as big as people want it to, really. As big and long.
I mean, we're really just focused on the second book to see whether it's like people want us to expand this. And then, ideally it'd be a series of books following different LGBTQ protagonists. And then from there, who knows? I mean...
Yeah, you just see how popular it is. And the biggest thing is just getting it to an audience, really.
Mm-hmm. The filmmakers in you, would you love to see an animated film of some kind come of this eventually?
Yeah, well, we can't say we haven't thought about that. That'd be pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot easier to Kickstarter a book and create the storybook version of that than it is to do. I mean, you just couldn't Kickstarter a movie version as an animated film, or you could try and it wouldn't actually be very good. Like you actually want it to be a, kind of gold standard version, and I sort of describe them as like these are the stories that. These are the stories that should have been that never were that should have always been.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just sort of like trying to. That was another comment about when I was talking to a publisher and they were saying about the artworks. Like, oh, if you wanted to one day do something like this, like why are you using old style animation, sort of artwork inspiration? Why aren't you using sort of you have that more modern 3D animation look? And I was like, well, these are the story, like what I just said. It's like we're trying to slot into history here of like correcting what hasn't been done that should have been.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that appeals to me so much is that it is the old school type of drawing that I grew up on.
Yeah,
in both my animated movies and my children's books.
Yeah, and I think also now for our generation, we grew up like we didn't really read that many fairy tales, but fairy tale stars looked like that. And our generation's becoming parents now, so that's why I think it will appeal. It's just a case of getting it in front of people.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So for people who might be coming to the Kickstarter in this last week, where we will be when this airs, what would you recommend as like the backer level that gets them the most bang for their buck and would be the ideal kind of gateway to getting into the Promised Land world?
One of our rewards is a bundle where you get Promised Land, a printed copy of Promised Land and a printed copy of Maiden Voyage. So if they don't have the first book, that'd probably be the one to go for, I would say, where you get both. There's also an ebook version of that where you get just an ebook of each as well. So those two, I imagine, if they were completely new to the series.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we will definitely be linking up in our show notes to that Kickstarter because we want to see you guys get funded because we want the book, nothing else. Now, I noticed on your website that you're part of this Inclusive Mind Collective, and I wanted you to talk a little bit about that because I really like the mission of changing the face of children's books. What is this initiative?
Yeah, so Inclusive Minds is a UK-based initiative, and it's all about, kind of, they have a charter about kind of publishers or authors or writers even taking stock or taking the initiative to write and create projects that represent the world around them that aren't just kind of following the standard formula that what has come before. And it's not just about sexuality. It's it might include disability. It might include making sure that your books are ethnically diverse or anything like that. And even I guess to some extent it might be religion as well. And it's just about providing resources and providing stories that authentically represent the world, rather than just kind of continuing what has come before.
Mm-hmm. And it's really nice to see that happening out there because the children need to find themselves in the books in the same way that adults do.
For sure.
So what's the best way to keep up with the Promised Land projects as both Maiden Voyage gets ready to go and anything that comes up in the future?
Well, we do have a newsletter. So if people go to promisedlandstore.com, there's a newsletter they can sign up to. And then, we have a Facebook page as well.
Yeah.
We're on Twitter.
Yeah, Twitter, Instagram, we've got everything. But that newsletter gets updated. We usually send out something at least once a month. with an update of everything that's happening with the book and with the books with the new one.
Mm-hmm.
So anytime we get new press or whatever, we'll let people know through there, and any exciting news or new products get sent out through there.
Yeah, and you've certainly expanded the product line quite a bit. I mean, we got one of the posters a few months back, and the coloring pages, and
we the coloring book was really cool, launching that a few months back, and we
the artwork. Yeah, I've got a couple of the prints. We've got a giant version of the map. So it's like that's sort of in my wall in my bedroom. It's got like all of the kingdom of Valeria.
The artwork's just beautiful. You need it printed
around
out
you.
that big.
That's awesome. Well, we wish you guys so much success. It's really awesome that you're bringing this stuff out into the world, and hopefully it'll inspire more, not only for people to pick up your stuff, but for other creators to take the jump on it as well.
Yep, sure.
Yeah, definitely. We hope so.
Adam and Chaz, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having us.